Okay, so this is the Community Economic Development Committee. John Weddleton.
Dick Drain.
Pete Peterson.
Brian Yale, Planning.
Francis McLaughlin, Planning.
Nancy Honest, Clerk's Office. Anita Brodsky.
Chris Schutte, Economic Community Development.
Tyler Robinson, Curriculum Housing.
Phil Steyer, Chugach Electric.
Kate Ensko, Glacier Extract.
Okay, thank you. Pete? Okay. We got the agenda. Any changes on that?
Mr. Chair.
Yeah.
Perhaps it'd be appropriate to add on item 4A. The planning department, along with development services, has developed a marijuana permit flow chart. I'd just like to go over that.
We were talking about that this afternoon. Okay, and then I just want to have a comment, just to get to the start, to get it out of the way. But we had looked at this Girdwood GRST 1 and 2 and adding marijuana to retail as a permitted use at a previous meeting, and that was to have been introduced on the 21st for public hearing Tuesday, but it got bobbled, so we never introduced it. So we're going to just take what we did and introduce it this Tuesday. So it delays it a little bit.
Just delays it a couple weeks.
Yeah, and I think it's fine. Yeah. It's kind of on the, we tried to do it quick and it bobbled it. This puts us on the normal schedule. We will not try to do it quick. So they're okay. So just so you know, when you see this laid on the table again, right?
I think we're going to be able to do it on the agenda.
Just off for the applicants, what we do is, we kind of discuss a little bit the assembly members first, but then if you have somebody say, raise your hand. We try to avoid the cross conversation. But when you get a chance, any point we made, just address it. All right. And then, so Kate and then
Dr. Peters.
Right, thanks, welcome. Okay, so any comments? I actually ended up with a whole bunch of them.
Did you? I didn't really,
I didn't do this, so it's not crisis things, but some of it ties in a little bit to stuff we'll be talking about in the license. Okay, so we got, shared parking units, and it just, so you have, one, the building's on 2 lots, and it's just, you can do that without replatting into 1 lot.
Correct, since the parking lot extends into the lot to the north, they have 5 parking spaces on that lot, so they just need a shared access agreement since the primary structure is on lot 31.
But the building can't cross the property line, is that the
Correct.
rules on that? Okay.
And it doesn't.
Okay, I just wanted to check, I didn't know if you made a replat because at all.
That was an option we considered, but it would take too long to replat, so we did a shared access.
Yeah, if you don't have
Several.
Post-automobile world.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
have parking. Okay, and then parking layout. But there's an odd thing on page 5 of 13, so there's early things, I think that was your report, right? There's a comment that said, 10 parking spots per use. Look on page 5. Right down. But there wouldn't be, for this use, 10 parking spots.
it's in the right here.
Plan shows
Okay, so the third thing, so this is based on square footage out of there, to each use shown as a, this service required to like 10 parking spaces, but for 786 square foot manufacturing, one.
That's taking the whole square footage of the building into account. So for just the manufacturing, it's 1 to 400, so that's 2 parking spaces, but then that's taking into account all the retail space plus the workspace.
So you were kind of anticipating, okay, you're gonna retail in there, and that would be 150.
Correct, because it's, will be a newly constructed building. I think you guys have your foundation in yet. Okay, so the foundation's in.
Okay, so, because in the thing, or so you were pretty clear, you plan on retail later, but also you have cultivation.
Not anymore.
Not anymore?
We actually, no, because what the city required for us to have cultivation down there was kind of unrealistic, so we moved it to the valley.
What were the issues?
They were.
Yeah, it was actually DEC issues at that point in time, and they were trying to say that our classification currently at that point in time, we couldn't have that kind of occupancy down there, but we actually changed the classification of the building to a class 5A for a fire rating status. So now technically we can do anything that we want in the basement. So there's no classification required.
So it was like a building code
Yeah.
thing, and then because you're on well and staff, they put that in.
Yes.
So that was an issue with the DEC. Okay.
They didn't want us discharging it, but we have a solution for that too. If we were to cultivate down there, we have a solution for that. It will all be contained, nothing discharged whatsoever.
Okay, so you have a lot of building you're not using though.
Uh,
I mean, if you do
Yeah,
the
well,
retail and the manufacturing, you've got 3,000 square feet of using. Okay. This, there's on page 17, comment, and I think this is in the petitioner's packet, request to make a signed certification from an industrial hygienist or professional engineering condition prior to the life. That's not what you're proposing. How does that fit in? Why are they asking for that? How does that fit in?
So that'd be, I believe condition 7.
Do you have that in here? Just that.
Yeah, And it is a use-specific standard for marijuana manufacturing facility that they provide the planning certification from an industrial hygienist or professional engineer that the equipment that they're installing is safe and won't harm the public or employees. The difficult part with that is many engineers or industrial hygienists won't write that letter to certify it until the equipment's installed. And then the applicant is stuck in this kind of between a rock and a hard place where they have to purchase all this equipment, but they don't know if it's going to actually be certified. So what we do is we just have a condition that gives them the ability to kind of work that out with the inspector to get that equipment either installed or see what they're comfortable with, and then they can install that equipment, get it inspected, and then we can get that letter to us and sign off on it.
So do they get the license technically before this is done, or they don't get a license while this is done, then you get a license?
Correct. They have to satisfy all the conditions of the application, so that's special use permit.
Which leads to, and this gets really finicky, but we don't want to trigger, if there's a change in your operation, at some point you could trigger having to come back to the assembly. You don't want to do that. So on page 113, well, page 23, you say you're going to use a certain kind of piece of equipment by Eden,
Yeah.
and then on page 113, it is by Apex.
Yeah, that should have been a typo. It was Apex at first, but we actually switched manufacturers.
Yes.
Okay, so you
that
just-
is a typo, yeah.
Well, it's not typo, it's just that's what we had at the time with the state.
So which
Same machine.
Which becomes the one, which is the official, would they have to come back with assembly or the state?
This would be, since it's a state application, it'd be just a quick fix with the state.
Do we have anything that would review this triggered if they change equipment? The city?
If they change equipment, that would be a minor modification that could be done administratively, that would trigger all that.
How would this equipment equate to anything that you guys do here as far as heat or anything?
We don't particularly want them to. The way this was all originally written, pretty much any change in your operation has to go back through the assembly. We thought that was a little excessive. We changed the wording so it was triggered to a much higher level. But I think there are some safety things, as people went and changed dramatically, produce something that might be a fire safety thing. And so we want professionals to review it. We're just a little, we just made that change fairly recently where the review changed, and some people are, I don't want you to have unnecessary stuff in here that would trigger a review, it's a hassle for you, it doesn't for us. So we're just kind of watching.
I get that with certain equipment where, that's a change in relation to the building or something like that, because the difference between these two machines, I guess.
Right.
Maybe the department, there's a ground blast or a square.
Right.
Essentially, the thing like what you do that.
Yeah, and I expect that, and that's, I just want to make sure that it did not trigger a review. Sounds like you might have to tell the state to switch, I don't know what their rules are.
Probably not. I mean, we'll point it out to the inspectors when they come, but they know, I mean, it's the same exact type of machine, it's just literally COVID passes.
Okay.
Yeah, makes sense, yes.
And Bill, there's no electric thing at this point.
There's not, but my interest was piqued when you said you had moved away from the idea of cultivation, but you're going to have a building that potentially could be. And I would just encourage you to think that through as you're sizing your electrical requirements. Yeah. And there's no, because it's not cultivation, there's no letter required from GH to support their application.
Do you see if we were to put cultivation down there that there would be an issue as far as parking spaces or something like that?
Now, parking spaces, our issue is where utility would be, if you were to try and get a cultivation license, both state and municipal, the municipal process then would require you to submit a letter provided by Chugach that evaluates whether we are or are not capable of serving the electrical demand at that location. And so, there's two parts of that. One is your building's electrical wiring, and the other is our facilities to serve it. So easier to build it into your building. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Still represents GS Electric. Not necessarily. Okay,
Storage is a separate calculation.
This is not, this is they're here, but we're gonna be talking about some changes in licensing, trying to make things work a little bit easier, mostly for renewals. We haven't had all that cleared up, so that's on our agenda this evening. So one thing is change of ownership. And on this is kind of interesting because Dr. Skeeter said you own everything. The license is, the designated licensee is doing business as Glacier Extracts, the building and the business essentially.
Yeah, so what
Owned by
happens?
separately. So what does it change? If you anticipate a change in ownership, you have to go through a big process. Maybe you don't. We're looking at who owns what, who owns the license. Does the license go to the guy who owns the business or the manager?
So what are, for the state side of these, what we did here is we have an overarching C corporation that's called Cannabis Inc. And then Cannabis Inc. owns 3 LLCs. Each LLC owns the marijuana license. The 5 licensees, Dr. Peterson, Dr. Johnson, Dr. Grissom, and Cade and Adam Boyd are all anticipated to be equal owners, but as of right now, their capital contributions they're not finished, right? Because the building is still being built. So at the end, that's what the agreement is. At the end, when the building is built and the capital has been contributed, stock will be reallocated. Right now, we just didn't want to make an arbitrary designation of ownership because that could just lead to issues. And Dr. Peterson kind of spearheaded this and brought this project going forward. So that's why we have it set up the way it's set up. They have internal agreements that this is how it will happen. From the state side, I explained to the state because they were confused on that issue too. And that's why we end up getting all 5 licensees right now, so they can do the FBI background checks, fingerprints, all that stuff can be approved by the board now. As we go on, I will file notices of change of ownership that will just show the 20% going the 5 different ways, and it won't trigger a transfer of license because it's not more than 51% of any one owner. So, yeah, that's kind of how that will happen.
So we'll be talking about a change in controlling interest. Now, that's a change in controlling interest, so they would have to come back. At what level to the example?
Yeah.
That's what we're talking about. So we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
It was just kind of an interesting example of, not that anything was wrong with it, it made perfect sense, but I just want to make sure that when we talk about stuff later, we don't miss the real life examples. Just kind of look at it, make sure we don't do something like stupid. Hopefully. Okay, that was about it for me.
On page 121 of 219, I show you're making capsules, white and green capsules. Now those hallucinogenic or those just CO2 oil or?
It's going to be.
I know nothing about this, you have to tell me.
Yeah, it's going to be CO2 extracted crude oil, and then that's going to be suspended in MCT oil to a 5 milligram homogeneous consistency at that point.
So is it in fact hallucinogenic or is it just therapeutic?
It can be psychoactive if it's not decarboxylated. THC is not psychoactive, so THC will have both active and non-activated. So it's not going to be psychoactive if you take the THCA form. If you take just THC form, that will be psychoactive at 5 milligrams.
Get that?
If you heat
No,
if
but-
you heat THC up past 200 degrees, it loses the carboxylic molecule. That makes it psychoactive. If you eat it raw, as is, it will not get you high. It'll perform an anti-inflammatory effect, much like that.
Will these ones get you high or not?
So we'll have the ability to do both,
Both.
Okay.
manufacture both.
So which one are you gonna manufacture?
We're gonna both,
Both, okay.
and they will be labeled as such.
How will they be labeled?
That's THCA non-psychoactive and THC psychoactive.
On the pills themselves?
On the pills, but on the pills, they're going to be little green crosses, which isn't shown on this.
Little green cross, okay?
Yeah, the pills will be identified as containing THC.
You know what?
It's a whole new world.
We don't really deal with it. The state says you can't claim to have any medical benefit from marijuana. You're
Currently.
breaching that. You have current pharmaceuticals kind of applies, and then the little, isn't that what the green cross
smell like fresh cannabis very briefly, but typically not very
Well,
often.
it's still illegal in the municipality to purchase consumed publicly. No, well, you smell it briefly, but if somebody has a brownie, I can.
Yeah, and it's illegal in the state.
Which I'm sure that.
The reality is, so now it's open to be walking down the street smoking. You wouldn't know it.
I see more people do vaping all the time, you know, it's becoming really popular.
Set the state for council legislation.
Yeah.
Okay, so any other questions? You guys got anything to add? So what do we recommend?
Recommend approval, send on the body.
Okay, so we'll go for it. So basically, when it comes up on Tuesday, we'll open a public hearing, you can speak if you choose to, and then we'll just state that this committee has reviewed it, we recommend approval, and then the whole body will vote. So we'll guarantee how it goes.
One thing, John, we would like you there at the meeting though, just in case we've got some colleague who wants to ask a question. I don't want to ask, are you here, and nobody show up.
Ever happened to any of my clients?
None for your clients, but you don't represent everybody, but
No,
you're
I
getting
know.
there.
Yeah.
So, quick question for you guys. We're coming up for this same meeting for the other side of the building. They don't have that metro home. I hate to see that in here. That actually doesn't like what we're doing.
Well, it's up to you.
Yeah, we just need one licensing.
If you guys have specific questions for me to that project, I'm the same owners, the same businesses,
I don't think it's a requirement. I mean, you want to make sure, as long as Kate can answer the questions that you might have.
I'll be available on the phone.
All right, good luck. Thanks.
Roll the green pill.
I stay with you.
Green cross.
Did you see Captiva got their first one? 3-2 vote. Oh, I figured that'd be a slam dunk. Yeah.
Tina got their first.
You saw what I was talking about. I can't believe it's 3-2.
No, it's, you do a great comedy. It's the way you said it was really fun.
Okay, so Kelly, you want to sit up here? Is Terry gone?
Yeah.
He's gone. That's why I didn't answer those 6 emails this month.
Either responds or not.
Oh. Okay, so what we have here is the change in mixed-use development standards in B1A, B1B, and this was introduced in our previous meeting. And I pulled it to come through the committee, partly because I think we're saying all Title 21 comes through the committee, and it didn't seem to slow things down. And then I also had some concerns because we're skipping the normal procedure, which would be just go to the planning commission, they do their review, eventually come to us. And there's good reasons, there's some urgency in it. But I also want to make sure, I mean, those are for minor technical errors and oversights, and anticipated consequences. And I was looking at this, does this quite hit that level? Because I don't want to have the slippery slope where everything gets under that procedure. I will let Chris and Tyler complete their case, which I think they did well. I feel a lot better about it now. Does that work? You want to just kind of address it, why is it urgent? Why is it an error? And why should skip the normal process, I guess?
Yeah, maybe I'll start. I'm sure Francis, Christine and Terry had worked on some of that rationale as well. Thank you for having me here today. The urgency is that this is related to a development that is in front of the Urban Design Commission for a site plan review on Wednesday. You're hearing this issue on Tuesday. It's a Muldoon development. It's one building, part of a 3-building development in Muldoon. It's a $17 million project that we need to see permitted and built this year, or we're just not doing it, not just this year, but ever. And sort of how this came about is, as you know, we have done mixed-use buildings before. We have some in Mountain View under the old code, one in Muldoon under the old code. We have ones being constructed in Spenard under the new code, and other projects and this building in particular is built in the new code as well. not know about this section of code. We didn't know it existed, and frankly, staff, I don't believe knew it existed. There's a section in 2104 that has specific criteria related to mixed-use buildings. So it's not related to, this is what happens if you're in the B3 or if you're in the neighborhood mixed-use district. It's, if you have a mixed-use building, here's what you have to do. And it fundamentally contradicts the other portions of the design guidelines that have to do with commercial buildings or residential buildings. So the design guidelines in Chapter 7 don't explicitly deal with mixed use. Is that right, Francis? They dealt initially with commercial, which were deleted. All of the design guidelines having to do with commercial buildings, and I'm not here to say that's a good thing or a bad thing. I'm just saying it's a fact, right? So if I were to build a strip mall or a 8-floor commercial office building, I don't have design guidelines associated with that. If I have multifamily requirements, I do have significant multifamily requirements, but you'll recall several months ago, we reduced the window area required for multifamily from, I think, 15% down to 10%. What that is it's also an area, right? It's not just a lineal calculation, it's an area. Well, this section in 2104 said if you have a mixed-use building, not if you have a multifamily, not if you have a commercial, you have to have 50% of up to 2 elevations of your commercial ground floor windows glazing. Of the area, not the linear length. Okay, so half of the wall space, 50%. And if you have residential, 34% of the area of the windows needs to be glazing. So compare 34% to 10%. Fundamentally, and I have pictures here if you'd like to see kind of the building where when we started looking at it, we frankly couldn't meet 34% of residential glazing if we even wanted to. Not to mention that it's not a good idea because when you build small 1-bedroom units, you need to have places where you can put stuff, right? You wouldn't want a wall. Maybe there's a couple of these. Thank you. And so the issue was on the residential, our approach was, well, could we meet it? No, we can't. Well, what are they going to do? We don't know. Well, let's at least, if it comes up, and it really, frankly, we get hung up at the permit counter, it hangs up our whole project. So just to orient you to this building, and again, I could show you other buildings that we built and how they don't comply, but how we still feel like it's a decent, not just a decent, we think it's a high quality building for Anchorage. This building is located on the corner of Muldoon and Creekside Drive. So the east elevation on your second page, the bottom one, is driving down Muldoon. Okay. First thing I would call your attention to is in this building, the ground floor is not 100% retail. So I think the code was written as though you're in a downtown area where 100% of that ground floor was going to be storefront. If I'm actually surrounded on 3 sides by roads, I would have no back of house, no place to put a bathroom in my commercial area, no place to put a back office. I mean, I could, but I'd have this 50% glazing. Not to mention, in this building, I'm really only putting retail at the corners. I'm not putting it in the middle. The code is sort of silent on that. If you on the front page, you'll note that you're looking at kind of how the building is fronted to the rest of the main entrances are all internally oriented at this point in the Creekside Town Center. There's a lot of glazing on this building. You can see the column of glazing that we even have on the residential portion, but it still doesn't get us close to 34% of the upper floors. And the lower floors, what we were actually doing, our architects were trying, before we realized what they were doing, that they were designing this, they were literally going floor-to-ceiling windows on the commercial portions, and they were reducing the height of the commercial space, right, to increase the percentage. So fundamentally, we were ending up doing things that really, it decreased the utility of the space for us, right? So my recommendation, first of all, when we saw this, we had an option. We said, well, we could hope that they don't pick it up like the last building we came through, right? And that felt really risky, given that it's a pretty significant project, and to go through this process, right, would delay us, we'd lose the whole building. So my recommendation to Terry and Hal at the time was delete the section entirely. Why do we need a specific mixed-use building? So why are we treating a use different than we're treating, to me, when you talk about design, we ought to talk about districts. We ought to talk about the context that we're in. And it doesn't matter what the use is, but, and so there's another thing at play in this ordinance which talks about setbacks. And you'll recall in a lot of the kind of new urbanist ideas, there's a notion that you can pull the building up to the street to create a more street-friendly environment and try to direct the parking behind it, right? Well, right now, the way this reads is you're requiring mixed-use buildings to be pulled up to the street, but not residential-only buildings, not commercial-only buildings. So you've in effect created by de facto, you've created a non-coherent building pattern along the street. It doesn't make any sense. So if we can turn to the ordinance, first of all, we're here to really say, we need this. We're pleading with you to get this through to make this project go forward. We think, first of all, it had complete acceptance from the Northeast Community Council. Some of you that know, and as I'm sure Mr. Peterson knows, that's not an easy thing. I think we had one gentleman say he didn't like it, but by and large, I think it passed 18-1. We've really got a track record in this area of building quality products. The changes that you have in the ordinance, I think Chris and I just saw, there appears to be a bit of an error in this section. So I think staff's recommendation was if you deleted the whole thing, then that would seem like it wasn't just fixing one little fix. But I said all this because I do think at some point you need to come back and address these issues more holistically for mixed use, because I'm not moving forward with another mixed use building with the setback situation the way that it is. So, but if you can look at on the second page, 7A, what we're effectively doing is saying that the street-facing elevations, up to a maximum of 2 elevations, would go from 50% to 15%. Honestly, we can probably meet that even if we only had a small portion of the building retail. But for sure, if it was all retail, that'd be simple to meet. And then as you go past the all caps, it does, so about halfway through that paragraph, windows or entrances shall comprise at least 10% of the non-residential wall area of the upper floor building elevation. I think what this should say is windows shall comprise at least 10% of the upper floor building elevation. I mean, I think you're assuming that that it actually is likely to be residential uses in the upper floors. And I'm not sure that it really makes a lot of sense that there's entrances on the upper floors. Does that make sense? So I think the intent of this ordinance is to say in a mixed-use building, the ground floor ought to be 15%, the upper floors ought to be 10%.
Can I ask a question? I go back to this window fight we've had before, and I still feel like when we're bickering over 10 or 15%, I mean, it's arbitrary. Like, where do you come up with 15%? Why can't we just say 10% and be done with it?
Yeah, well,
I mean, because it's, when I sat here and had this discussion with Erica, and we went through the history of it, it was arbitrary, completely arbitrary, where they're coming up with these window percentages. And what I've seen, the impact, when I'm looking at the architect's drawings of the different houses, I'm thinking residential and windows and closets, right? Nobody can justify for me, why they came up with the number. It was arbitrary, but I see the impact to the industry. And we're literally shutting down projects because of some of this arbitrary. I don't understand why we keep pushing this. Why can't we just think about it realistically? And I remember the ugly houses. I remember them. And so I know where that feeling is coming from, but from an architect or a technical design standpoint, what's the difference between 5%?
Yeah, so then you go through this exercise of measuring it. Honestly, I can't imagine having less than 20 to 25% on a building that we would do on the ground floor on the entrance area. Now, if it's on a corner with 3 streets, even the one that people hold up, one of our Mountain View developments that actually does achieve the the glazing on the front, it doesn't on the side, you know, so that wouldn't pass. It doesn't on the upper floors. I think my point, where I think Anchorage needs to go, is really look at its areas, its districts specifically. And I wouldn't take all of Spinard Road, for example. I'd look at the north end separately from the middle end, separately from the west end. I'd look at Arctic, I'd look at areas downtown, not treat downtown all the same. 4th Avenue may be treated differently than other places. This is how other cities work, because the context is everything, right? And so there's a lot of things that at the end of the day, I have no problem meeting in Title 21, but it's the ticky-tack process to get there, you know, and the arguments over, you know, this stuff here and there. This, I think, was we're appreciative of the fix to allow this project through. The way that it was described to me is that it was still a placeholder to go back and relook at mixed-use buildings after the land use plan map is adopted. You know, that said, again, with the setback issue, that's potentially problematic, not for this development, but for other developments that we would look at.
Can you answer my question?
Yeah. I mean, I think that it's, commercial developments and residential developments are different, and the idea that we want to increase window area to active spaces for our commercial development, and that's something that engages the street, advertises the products. So we don't want to conflate the window requirement for residential with the window requirement for commercial, because they're different. Now, as Tyler said, there's no window requirement at all for commercial currently. It's just in this mixed use standard section. But he said also 15% would be easy to make. So we're comfortable with 15% there. What I think the department would say, and so I did a study of Huffman Road between the Seward Highway and Old Seward, and the majority of the businesses along that section of Huffman provided nearly 50% windows. Everything but banks had windows along the facade over a significant portion of their first floor. Most of the windows began 4 foot high and stretched up to the 12 foot high ceiling. Walgreens was not one of them because their building form that comes from out of state, they do this EPIS thing where they sort of they can use their wall area internally for shelves if they don't do windows. And they'll say it's all about we're a pharmacy and we're going to get robbed like a bank or something like that. But it's really, I think, more to look at their commercial pro forma. But so I think that your comment about 10% windows, can we just stick with 10%? I think the department would say that there was a testing of commercial, what's reasonable for commercial window area requirements, and that 15% is achievable, and it might nudge some businesses to do more windows than they otherwise would, which is what we were seeking. But we shouldn't confuse it with the 10% window requirement that's in code for residential development, because commercial should be treated different from residential.
No, I get what you're saying, but I just don't see, there's a lot of assumptions there. It might do this, it might do that. I want to know where the study is that shows me 5% is going to make a difference. 10, 15%. Because I've never heard anybody say it. I just don't understand why we're making rules like this. I don't know where that number came from. If there's a basis for it, I'm all for it.
Yeah.
But I've never, in all these meetings, all these years, when I'm asking about when we're changing something to a certain thing, why are we doing it that way?
So it's based on the arbitrary selection of a number is not based in science, but the concept supporting having minimum standards for window, especially on a street frontage, come from the notion of having more eyes on the street, right? It's a public safety issue, primarily in denser urban neighborhoods like a downtown or a Spinard, granted. But the whole concept is, look, one of the ways that you can increase the public safety of an area is just have more eyes on the street at any given time. So in mixed-use districts where that density does occur, it makes a lot more sense than perhaps in
And you know, that's what I say, I'm not gonna die on the sword for this one, and I mean, because if the industry's saying, listen, we can hit 50%, no problem, I just don't wanna be an impediment to development or a good project, because we picked a number that, in theory, and even what you described as a theory, it's not necessarily scientific, but a theory, you know, it may be spot on, I just don't know. And so I just wanna make sure we're not putting up our noses to our face, basically.
I had a couple other points if you would walk through the ordinance with me, but to Mr. Boston's point, I've seen a lot of communities that basically say in certain areas that you have to have, I think the language that Francis used was, you know, street engaging facades, or, you know, something to that effect.
Porches sometimes.
And they're very subjective almost, right? But as you know, the approach that we've taken in Title 21 is we didn't trust each other to be subjective, right? Because someone would let someone skate with something. So we had the whole process that John and I and others painfully went through was we're going to come up with a number somewhere so there's nothing arbitrary. That said, development, you know, our town is laid out so differently. The development in Muldoon is so different than Spinard Road, so different than downtown. It just the lot patterns are different in all matters. But if I could, I talked to you about some issues on A. On B, I just would clarify. It says provide at least one primary entrance within 60 feet of the street sidewalk or 90 feet of the building. Yada, yada, yada. My question is just that you're talking about one primary entrance on the building. So you wouldn't say one primary. I don't have to have a residential entrance and a commercial entrance. Or if I have two retail spaces, I have to be able to get into that other retail space within. I think the spirit of it is I've got a building. I have 1, 2, 3 entrances. My one primary entrance meets it, so I need it. I don't need to meet both with a commercial and a residential. Is that right? Okay. I just want to clarify because you never know. Again, under C, the C section, buildings shall comply with maximum setbacks, except that the location of the maximum setback may be changed. There's sort of some mitigating language here. You'll recall, right, we went from an environment that had minimum setbacks. Right? Everybody had a minimum setback and you could set back farther. The history, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not trying to, this is just my understanding, is we had at one point specific mixed-use districts in the code, a neighborhood mixed-use district, a regional mixed-use, and a commercial mixed-use, CMU, RMU, you know, remember those? In those districts, we created maximum setbacks, right? Regardless of use, because we wanted to say, okay, we're going to deem that this place is the right place for a commercial mixed-use district. Well, the district went away, right? But just the setback specific to the use of mixed use stayed. I mean, to me, that's an unintended consequence. We have these districts, which again, from a planning standpoint, makes sense. We're going to create an edge in a neighborhood, and everything's going to have to comply with that edge. But when we deleted it, we're just saying, now if you have a mixed-use building, you've got a maximum setback. Pull that building up the street. If I do a residential project on the same place, and I notice that the prevailing pattern is to be set back, where do you think I'm going to put it back? Mm-hmm. So it was, I understand how it got there, but the logic doesn't make sense to me. So I'm just saying, not fixing it now doesn't hold up my development, but it's something that ought to be dealt with either now or later, and I get concerned how long it takes with everything else the planning department is doing, and we won't get to it for 3 or 4 years, and that might be a couple mixed-use buildings that we decide not to build.
Well, I think he makes a good point. I mean, it's in front of us now, why don't we just deal with it now? What is the department's position on that particular issue?
The department's position is that these proposed technical amendments these meet the criteria for a technical amendment. Eliminating a whole section would not be, and that
what would the easiest solution be? And I'm not a planner, so I'll probably mess this up, but my initial thought when I looked at this section, why are we keeping it in there? Well, it shall comply with maximum setbacks. Why, if what Tyler's saying is accurate, which I have no reason to think it's not, why don't we just take out the word maximum and say minimum?
Well, it just would still have, the building would still have to comply with the setbacks in the zoning district. I mean, again, you're not making it specific to a use, you're just saying this building's treated just like any other building.
So it would be easier just to strike section C?
Well, I mean, again,
That's
I
my
don't see
second
why
thought.
it's in there, other than it's a toehold to eventually come back and talk about this stuff. But we have a land use plan map, as Francis states, where we're gonna talk about this stuff. From a, not a use specific, but a location specific conversation.
So let me make sure I understand. So specifically to section C, if we were to strike section C, there are other parts of Title 21 that still deal with setbacks. And it would, those same rules would still apply. You're just not hampering somebody who might be in this mixed use.
Which, by the way, feels like it's only cooking on the housing. I mean, it feels like this thing is written for us.
Which is crazy, because you guys really have great developments, actually.
Well, thank you.
I admire them. I drive home past Milton all the, I mean, it's your district. I mean,
Looks good, doesn't it?
well, yeah, it really does. I mean, so when we're looking at this particular section, I mean,
Yeah, I want them to build buildings in Muldoon like this. You know, that's a good thing. So,
right, I mean, I'll tell you, right now, as I've gone through this, we're at the end, this is our last section. I personally would recommend two changes. Change number 1 would be on page 204, line 33. I would delete or entrances. So it just says windows shall comprise at least 10% of non-residential. That would be my first amendment. I would recommend to remove
What's your page? Is this
page
from our-
204.
204, okay.
Yeah. So it's on line 33, I would recommend deleting or entrances.
That was cited to that, is that?
Ms. Emboski?
Yes.
Leaving in or entrances actually helps the developer because it allows you to count entrances towards that window area requirement. So Tyler and developers would want to see as many things counted as possible, so.
On the
this-
upper floor.
But it's upper floor.
Oh,
I think it's a typo, so that's good.
I thought I was like, oh, did I mess something up again? Sometimes it's like speaking German to me, you know?
No, I think.
Why does it say non-residential, Francis? Shouldn't it be the residential portion of the deal?
You know, we'd have to speak to long-range planning about why they work it this
I
way.
think it's a typo. And the recommendation that you heard Tyler suggest earlier that we caught in this is line 33, or entrances should be removed. And line 34, everything after the word 10% of, or 10% of should be deleted, so the non-residential should be deleted, so that it reads, shall comprise at least 10% of the wall area of the upper floor building elevation.
Yes. So we will say then, or this is a proposed amendment, windows shall comprise at least 10% of the wall area of the upper floor building elevations. Take out on line 33, the two words or entrances, and on line 34, non-residential. And that would take care of that problem. Do you have any problems with that, Chris?
No, that was,
It's just that, that's.
so we think it's, yeah, it was just a typo.
Okay, and you had it, then you would do.
Okay,
third thing.
so that was that first one. And my second one, I gotta tell you, I just haven't been convinced. I think we should strike section C. So that would be strike lines 27 through 34.
I did comment on that, it certainly could be done, but, you know, there is a dramatic difference between the, I mean, you definitely deal with setbacks, but maximum versus minimum is a huge different world of things. And I just think you walk down Magazine Street, New Orleans, which is, there's no parking there, it's chaotic, it's a narrow street, there's people parking on it, you can hardly drive through it, and it is mobbed with people shopping, hugely valuable. And it's just an old, it's not some newfangled idea, you know, you have the retail on the bottom, you have a couple of floors, or one floor, people living upstairs, it's cheap living, and people go there to shop, and they're just weird quirky stores. And you walk along, and all of a sudden you hit Alon's Drugs, and it's back there behind the parking. Why did they do that? Because it's 100% sensible to have all the parking in front, or convenient, the store's back there, and it's just, you hit that part, you go, this stinks, and then you walk 100 feet, and you're back where you want to be.
But if I could, I mean, it doesn't, because they can already do that if they don't have a mixed-use building.
Yeah.
That's my issue.
I'm not happy with that either.
No, I'm not either, but my point is, don't treat this this is already the hardest building type to finance, construct, get energy ratings for, lease up, manage long-term. They are by far, that's why people don't do them. And yet, we say we want them, but we've created a standard that's out of context. So downtown has maximum setbacks. We've agreed, I don't know if East Downtown did, which is why you have that Office Depot set way back, right? But in the core of downtown, and that's the one that we all cringe about, right? But what we're actually doing here is the reverse. We got Bernard Road, everything's set back, but we're gonna pull up one mixed use building, and the next buildings are just gonna keep make it apply to the. I mean, I am all for that. That's context design. That makes a great degree of sense. So that's why I think it's unintended, just because it's singling out this one use rather than the whole district.
Don't agree with that. And actually, I would say Cigar Road, one of the charming features about Cigar, they were set back, but as the road has widened over the decades,
They got
now
closer.
we're on the property line and you're walking up next to the.
Well, I will say, I mean, we have buildings where, but they're still not right on it. There's still enough space where it sort of feels good. But I agree. This, by the way, just for the record, this section does not affect this building. But that's just my observation as a planner.
Yeah, just two comments. One, I asked Francis to quickly peruse the use case, or the tables referenced in item C to see if it would have any practical effect to delete. And he agrees that you can delete it and code would still work. That being said, another alternative to that, considering that your earlier comments about some concern about changes to Title 21 that are outside of public process. One other way to solve that problem is if you feel compelled to leave the maximum setback language in on item C, perhaps what you could do is after the shall comply clauses, instead of creating this comma long section that says except at the location blah 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 blah, which eventually gets to the point it can be reduced if the director agrees that it's in the best interest of the project or the neighborhood. That would be one way to modify that. So you would have an item C that says building shall comply with maximum setbacks established in section 2106.020, common tables of dimensional standards in subsection 2106.030C5, period. And then you have a new clause that reads the maximum setback may be reduced with the concurrence of the director. And you leave it up to the director.
Reduce or eliminate it. I mean, it just may not be appropriate.
Yeah. But if you choose to eliminate the whole section as you originally proposed, that's fine too.
So, two things. I have to, I'm very sensitive about this because I see people going rants. This is absolutely not outside the scope of public process. And so I want to make it, I've been accused of this in the past when I use the appropriate public process, and other people do too. And so this is absolutely what we do. So it's not inappropriate. So I just want to say that that's tickles my feathers, just so that way.
The planning commission found that to be the case too, and they weighed in on that to say that the planning commission did not feel like it was out of the normal process.
Oh, I didn't know that. I'm glad to hear that. Well, and that's my point, is sometimes people will say it.
No, for this one.
Yeah, so, but my point is, this is an appropriate process, and it's our responsibility when we see something like this. But secondly, again, if we're recognizing that this is potentially an issue, and it sounds to me like it is, and the case to me, I'm satisfied that this particular use is being singled out from all the other uses. I don't find, parity there. So I still think the easiest, cleanest way to do this, we're not cutting out code, because there's still code that will deal with these setbacks. But I don't see the benefit in mandating a maximum use and then adding a caveat that the director might be able to do discretion. I still think cutting out the sections the easiest, cleanest way to do it.
Let's look at it. Sorry, Francis.
Well, anyone that wants to comment, I really didn't. I had prepared remarks, and Tyler said everything that I would say and went a lot further and into more detail. I wanted to keep this much more topical because the department's position was to make some minor changes and then look view is taking these overly restrictive requirements and reducing them rather than eliminating was the way to go here, because this is going to take more work, but we didn't want to hold up a valuable project that, it would be a real shame to stay in the way of Tyler's project and other ones that are planned to go forward this summer or in planning stages. The Planning and Zoning Commission, when I presented this to them, they made a motion stating, and they're very sensitive to Title 21 ordinances bypassing them. And so John Spring, one of the members who is particularly sensitive to that, he made a motion that yes, the planning department's proposed version of the ordinance is a technical amendment. So that gives the Assembly some cover that this is a technical amendment, and recommended unanimously recommended approval for the ordinance as written. Now, the changes that you guys are proposing, they may be good, they may be good, bad. It's not what the department had proposed. I agree with what Chris said. It's just that our discussion, and we have other things on the agenda, is kind of like narrow, and we're sort of making sausage or whatever, right? And there are other impacts. So if you delete section C, then that would mean that the maximum setbacks requirement would be deleted from the R4A, and it would be deleted from the CCO district. And do you mean that the pages on maximum setbacks in chapter 6, the dimensional standards, wouldn't apply to any district at all?
But wait a minute, we're specifically talking about mixed-use development.
Yes.
Specifically.
But unfortunately, the way the code is written, I'm sorry to use that word unfortunately, but it's sort of a personal word to use in this, but in the R4A, one of the design standards for the R4A district refers you to this section in the B1A, and so does the CCO district. So if you eliminate this, it would mean that we would have a section or a little chapter in our code that didn't apply to anything. It would just be dangling there. Yeah, so you could do that, and the department would be happy that you didn't delete the maximum setbacks at all, so that we could come back and they would still be in code. They just wouldn't be applicable to anywhere. Maybe Girdwood, but if you write it up, if you leave it the way that the department has written it here, or the way that Chris had recommended amending it, then that would leave that's the maximum setbacks applicable to the R4A and CCO. Does that make sense? I didn't want to get into any of this detail with you
Well,
guys.
it's important to do it because frankly, I'm still not happy with the solution because nobody's made the case to me why we're forcing mixed use to use maximum setbacks. My mind, maybe it's just because I'm dumb and I don't get it, but I don't understand why in this particular area we're saying you have to do the maximum setbacks. I mean, why can't we just say the setbacks are setbacks? I mean, this is the minimum. You got to meet it. Maybe they'll do more. Maybe they won't. I don't understand that. What am I missing?
The rationale is this is a maximum limit, right? This is the maximum amount the building can be pushed back, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't mean you can't be closer. It's just setting a maximum.
Okay. I was thinking about it in the exact opposite
You were thinking
way.
it was forcing them to go
Yeah,
back.
exactly. And I'm like, that makes no sense to me.
And what long-range plan would say is that this is critical to the forum that they're seeking for these types of developments in certain districts. I'm not good at making the case, long-range's case for this. So I'm sort of in an odd
No, that's okay. So then maybe, because I mean, the worst thing is when you have unintended consequences, which,
Yeah.
Frankly, planning and zoning is advisory to the assembly when it comes to this stuff. And so our job is when we see something that is going to impact, we can pull it back and make a decision without their blessing. And that was kind of what everybody said when they came to 21 is we will quickly address, unintended consequences. And so to me, I don't want to make a fix that makes more problems. So,
Can I ask, because I know where you're going with this, Francis, so when there's an empty reference like that, basically it's just words on paper that have no practical effect. So while it still exists, it wouldn't touch anything, it just would be sitting on the paper so that when there is work to come back and look at this more holistically, it can be cleaned up.
So Chris, I'm trying to make sure that we're making an improvement and not making something worse.
Yeah.
But the problem I have is I'm not okay with saying, well, we know we need to come back to this, but might be 1 to 3 years. To me, that's not acceptable.
Oh, no, I thought you were deleting it.
Yeah, so my question to you is, okay, you've heard the discussion, you've heard the argument, what do you think?
I think both options are good, and deleting it is a clean way of doing it. As Francis said, deleting it will leave other sections of code floating in space.
That we need to
But that's
deal with.
okay, but we can deal with those later. They don't have a practical.
And I think at least it's not maybe hampering a future project. I'm not hurting
I
anything.
don't think so.
I can give an example. I mean, one thing is like when we short-circuit the system, it's not that we can't appropriately do that, but then you start, it's a little more deliberate, the planning commission, they're kind of going through, they focus on this a lot, and then you catch things like, oh, if you delete it, then R4A and CCO go from have something where we may tend to miss that.
There's no
Going-
question that this is rushed, guys.
Right,
There's just
so
no
going
question about it.
through this.
My time's divided. I can't be in all places at the same time. And I'm writing other technical amendments as we speak.
I have no
Right.
doubt
To be
that.
introduced right today. You know?
Oh, yeah.
But to go through this, through the normal process, we maybe don't create more unintended consequences. That's why my preference is if we can, go through that normal process. Not that we're not allowed to.
Right. Well, and here's the thing, this is a challenge. As a committee member, we're sitting here hearing two different things from the same department. I mean, that's what we're doing. Chris is telling us it's fine, and Francis is saying we might have unintended consequences with these other ones, but it's basically empty words on paper that really aren't going to have an effect because the section's not here. So, I mean,
I think we're saying the same thing.
are you, or am I just hearing two different things?
We're saying the same thing.
We're saying the same thing.
So-
It's fine to do.
We're
It does
in-
create
we're in
this
agreement.
environment where there's a piece of code sitting in space,
That
but
doesn't
that's
really,
fine.
but it is something that we know we will come back to, and we can either know it's a problem here and leave it for 1 to 3 years and then try to address it, and potentially may or may not impact the project. Or we can delete this section of code, and we still know there's something over here that we still have to deal with. So either way, we have to deal with something. Is that what I'm getting?
Well, I'm sorry, go ahead. Who are you calling on? Pete. Pete, oh, sorry.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I think that if we delete this, someone may come in and be confused. Then they may look at it and go, why did they delete that? You know, and because it's disconnected, it disconnects from other sections. I don't know. I'm just wondering, we don't want to do something that's going to cause harm in the future. So there could be unintended consequences.
To answer your point, I think if it's removed, to think through the scenario you just laid out, if this section is removed, there would not be a case where someone came in and was working their project through the code, and then they would hit this and realize that it doesn't go anywhere. That would not occur if this comes out. I'm trying to come up with a good analogy to describe how this would work. But basically, it should not have any practical impact on anyone who puts a project through the review process. If this is removed, they will never know the difference. Staff will, because of the references that are now left floating in space. But that should not affect any project that comes through the door in any way.
Long-range planning would go berserk if the R4A district didn't have this building setback.
Can I just, on that point though, if I go to the R4A district, it shows you a maximum
Unless you do
20
mixed
foot.
use.
Huh?
Unless you do mixed use.
No, why would mixed use be,
If you go to the chapter 4, the R4A or the CCO, then it says, it refers you to the maximum setback section, and then the maximum setbacks are applicable for mixed-use development.
honestly, this is part of this is why this document doesn't work. You have to go from one place to another, to another, to another. It is, I'm telling you, it is constant. It's a constant thing. Our architects are frustrated with it, and we consider ourselves pretty sophisticated with this stuff. So I can appreciate staff. I want the same stuff that they do, we're not getting there. I'd say leave it in, make the change, allow the director to reduce it or eliminate it. Because I think that can be reducing means then I can't go all the way, right? Because it may just be, and then from there, we'll deal with it. Honestly, we won't deal with it. We'll deal with it when the next project comes along, is when we're gonna deal with it.
See, and this is a problem, because you might have a $20 million project that is delayed, stymied, or just, it's gonna end up costing more. How much time is it gonna cost to go through this process?
Well, luckily, it's just me right here, right, today. But the issue is, and again, I can appreciate the appearance that the community has that we're creating an implementing action of our comp plan and gutting it, right? I can appreciate that sentiment, but that's not what needs to be fixed, and which is also a very simple amendment. If the planning department doesn't have the ability to do it, I'll write the amendment, which is to make clear that there's a maximum setback in certain zoning districts, regardless of use. It would take me 3 hours to write that and bring it forward through the planning commission.
Well, and that's what I was just thinking. My thought is you have two strategies here. Because to me, I think leaving it is not acceptable. So strategy number one is you wipe it out and then you immediately come back with another amendment to go to those references that are going to be hanging and just refer them back to the tables, right? That's what you're saying. That's option one. So that is a two-step process, right? We have this in front of us right now. So that's a two-step process. And the other process, obviously, you can send it through the planning commission. Option B is right now we give the department director just the discretion to reduce it or eliminate it or whatever. And then we come back with a second one to wipe this out and fix those references all in the same document. Is that fair?
Either one.
So we have two ways to do it. So my question then is for the committee, like which way are you more comfortable with? And I'm giving you probably a false choice because you could tell me none of the above. But this is how, in my mind, I'm looking at it. I'm looking at, we see a problem, we've identified the problem, what are we going to do about it?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I actually think if we do eliminate this and Tyler writes the amendment he's talking about, I think that might be the easiest, quickest, simplest way to do this. That's kind of what it seems to me anyway.
No, I think Tyler was saying that your proposed 3-hour amendment is a separate ordinance, not having to do with this.
Yeah, it's basically your concern is that in certain zoning districts, it's clear that there's maximum setback, which is just a text amendment to the table.
So there's another part to this, which is this has been introduced. It's up on Tuesday for adoption, and
Yeah, I'm shooting myself in the foot by creating complications.
I don't know a lot about the legality of changing titles and changing references and all of that. We do know that the project is set to be approved on Wednesday night. We do know that this ordinance is up for a decision by you the day before. If you left the wording as is, it wouldn't hurt his project. If you amend it in a couple ways that have been described, or well, the one that Chris offered, I think that's all copacetic. But eliminating the section, we have to look at, what else is going on. Does it change the header, and can we do that?
Yes,
on
we
the
can
front?
do that. We absolutely can do that. Now, adding something to it, like the tables, that's why I said you have two options here if you're going to fix it. Option A is you eliminate section C, you come back with a second ordinance to fix the table. That's what Tyler said. Option B is you put in the little language here that says, okay, the director can do whatever, and then you come back. My reluctance to option B, and I've been doing this just long enough to know, when you kind of put a Band-Aid on it, sometimes the Band-Aid just sticks, and it never really gets fixed. And that's my concern. I am very uncomfortable recognizing we have a problem here, and everybody's just like, oh, it'll be 1 to 3 years before we fix it. So I'm more likely to go the more robust way to force it to have to be fixed. Option A. So that's what option A is wipe it out and then come back with a second ordinance to address Francis's concerns to make sure to redirect people back to the table.
I think the header, the way that Ms. Gabowski said would work. I don't think I think she's right. That you could delete that section because we've written in there amendment to building setbacks.
Just on option A, I'll go with, because my concern is 1 to 3 years, who knows who'll be on the body at that point in time. And we have to re-educate this entire group over again.
You're going to be done.
Huh?
You're going to be done. We're not all new people.
I may be gone by
You
then.
can come back and forth yourself.
That's true. But I don't think after 16 or 17 years I already want to do that.
One final comment. Both of those options, I think, solve the same problem. The one benefit I can see to option B is in case something came along that got tripped up in this, having the flexibility for the director to have discretion on the fly could help alleviate that concern. So that's the one benefit to B, but either option
No, A was
A
deleted.
was
B
deleted,
was
okay.
give the option to amend, blah, blah, blah. But here's another just caveat to that. Who is he? Pretty much it's only Pavilion that's dealing with this right now, right?
There's a couple more,
Is there-
although.
There are
although-
other developers.
Can I just say though, ironically, this doesn't apply to downtown.
Yeah.
I mean, the place where it sort of makes the most sense, it doesn't even apply.
Tyler, stop complicating things.
No, we've met with other developers that want to use the R4A, and this building placement thing, burning long range is essentially critical of that. So, in discussions with them, it may impact that whole development.
I can make a point too, is we're looking at coherent design, which integrates the housing and retail all in one. But if you looked at, the rustic oak, and if you said without a maximum setback, they could have put their restaurant with the parking in front. And that would have had a whole different tone of that development compared to what we have now. Now when you're going to that neighborhood, it's all right there, you have this neighborhood feel. I mean, the residential is residential, you no longer residential area. But if it were done the traditional way, it would all, at least the restaurant, something would have been set back, and you would have had parking in the street, some, not enough parking, but some, in front of it. That's a whole different tone. And that's why you have massive setbacks like that.
And you're
This is
seeing-
the neighborhood.
Yeah.
That's why I really think it's important.
You're
So-
seeing less of that too, I'm sorry to interrupt, you're seeing less of that too, not strictly because of Title 21, but just frankly because of design and the recognition that having a more prominent storefront and windows right adjacent to either your roads or your pedestrian walkways is good for business. So you look at on 36th, the ACS and Pita Pit development that Pepper did next to Zagaya. They put all of the parking back behind the development, pushed the development up the street. Now, the corners of it are the best designed part where there's lots of windows and it's right up against the street and the walkway, and all the parking's in the back. The entrances are still on the back, so it's kind of a interesting approach. But in talking to Mark about that site, one of the things that they pushed for was that because the tenants they had lined up, ACS and others, they wanted that visibility to the public. So
I'm a retailer, I'm there.
So I think
But
you're gonna.
not everyone is.
Yeah.
If you look at Walgreens and so on, they want it back with the parking in front here. So, and I know the one in Huffman, they have to be coaxed and bringing that forward. So it's this kind of thing that works. So I like that maximum setback. And if you do one business, it's fun, it's like this one too.
Yep.
But if you get the whole development doing that.
District, it has to be
District,
consistent
right.
with the zoning district. not
And
the use.
Spinard would be an example.
If it
Someone
had
who
its own
sets it
overhead.
back, like Popeyes, you're not Popeyes, all of a sudden it's set back, it's required to lose the areas.
So I think I'm gonna be like civil right now, because now I think option B is actually a better option. And the reason I'm saying that is because now in the last, minute and a half, I've learned there might be other developments. So, but I still think, I absolutely, Chris, wanna work with you, and can we get this other ordinance going? Like, to me, I think, I said this, I don't want my fix of an unintended consequence to make another unintended consequence. But I don't want to let this just go, because, I just hate it when we don't follow up and finish up on something we've identified. So if the committee would be okay with it, if, Chris, you could help us draft language to give the department director discretion in that section C,
yeah,
I would be okay with that, and we'll leave section C. We'll just put the department director discretion in there, but then the committee can come back with a second ordinance to basically wipe this out and fix it, and refer everybody back to the tables in their district.
yeah.
Does that seem?
Are you sure, Sybil, you're happy with this? Now we proceed?
Well, I think it'll make Mr. Weddleton happy.
Well, yeah.
You think that's a good balance?
So just on C is reworded, and I'm fine with that. And this is weird, when you reduce the maximum by 2/3, then you bring it in closer. So that wording confused me. Anyway,
Well, interesting.
Are
it's the
you,
wrong way, you have to increase.
You have to eliminate the maximum setback.
So I think you would reword, we'll have some wording, and Chris or someone would come up with it, or Francis.
I'll work with Francis.
Just basically say, you still have maximum setbacks in these tables, but the pretty broad latitude is
Right.
Change it. So you bring up, we'll do like an amendment?
I would recommend that for Tuesday, both the page 2 amendment and the page 3 amendment come as separate amendments.
Two separate amendments.
maybe questions.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry to complicate things. It's a rabbit hole.
I appreciate
It's a big
it.
one.
Okay, so we have, probably need to take whatever time it takes to go through the licensing. We want this renewal business ready to go when it hits. So, we have, everybody's got this one draft of 4/5/17.
Yeah.
Okay, did you hear anything from that?
I was not.
Okay, we
So
had
I
a
left
couple
it
of things
highlighted
sent
yellow
to
in
each other.
this, that is pending legal to get back to me on.
If they ask for that.
Okay, so you want to go through this, man? Go through section by section,
No.
or broad view, or?
I'm just getting my desk.
I was gonna skip the stuff that hasn't changed that you guys saw and approved already. So the stuff that I have in the notes, it was the change accepted by the committee. I think that's covered and that's been good. The stuff in red is some of the little changes that I've made, just either clarification or there's been a few other technical corrections. So page 2, we just added the municipal marijuana establishment license, just with a little bit more clarification.
The 33 you had, we talked about, and the fee is paid.
Right, and that's kind of, that's gonna be taken out. I forgot about that. Yeah, so the fee is paid.
But
Fee is paid is going to be eliminated?
Well, why don't you talk about the fee?
So-
That's consistent change.
So, in discussion with Rose Foley and Barbara Jones, the municipality gets 50% of the renewal application fees and the new application fees. So, to charge an operating fee on top, we thought was kind of unnecessary because we are already getting a fee from the state for this. And we're not allowed to do the renewal fee, we're not allowed to do a new fee per state. So it's kind of consistency with that. We felt that it just was not necessary to charge them more money when they're already paying.
And just to clarify, this is a fee that's paid to the state to renewal, we get half of it.
Correct.
We get half of the state.
Correct.
I talked to Barbara on this, and she's right. Barbara made the point that we don't need the money. We already get the money coming in from the state, so why charge it again?
Right, and Rose she's coming up with a really good, she and I are gonna work on an AIM to give the assembly a kind of a full view of the income that we've received thus far from these, and so I think that'll give a better idea of that we're getting a good chunk of the money from this, so we don't need to charge
Medicare
more.
said that she thinks they're being attacked anyway, so why charge it again?
And then, we had come up with the 250, basically to cover the cost of doing the mailing. We also we talked about getting it up here, which we kind of broached on. Janet?
I would just point out at the control board meeting yesterday, it was either yesterday or the day before, they did say that they're only going to charge renewal fees for those licenses that are in active status. So just so you know, so we might have to come to you guys for licenses that aren't active and go through the renewal process, but you won't get a piece of the fee because we won't pay to the state.
We addressed that too. You weren't active, we have some wording.
Oh, do we?
Kind of
Do we?
understand.
Oh, okay, I just didn't see that part.
Okay. Sorry.
So then, on page 3, just again, line 10, striking the application fee. 15, correcting, just is an R. Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah, so we'll do the.
It's just,
make sure
what
we
just
get it.
happened, we want to make sure we don't ever have that again.
Yeah.
Did I miss something? What happened?
Oh, we had a problem with absentee ballots getting out. Who was supposed to go to, it was cleaned up, but the problem was, we had no proof that actually received it. It was a software problem.
I had 2 people from my district, my daughter was one of them, who never got it out. Yeah, she emailed it, she got an email to her on election day, but I had another constituent tell me, and it's a different discussion.
But I just want to make sure,
Yeah, we'll do
absolutely
the
sure.
red receipt. So then on page 5, this is one of the big changes. So this is the noticing. There was the discussion of doing the Title 21 whole noticing, and the way that we have done noticing with liquor licenses, I integrated into the marijuana licenses. I feel for consistency, and because we were doing it to mimic alcohol, this just kind of goes along with that. So currently for liquor licenses, we send notification to all of the community councils on or before September 1st of any licenses renewing in their boundaries. And so they get a big spreadsheet of all of the licenses that are expiring in 2017. They're sorted by their community councils. And then if they have requests for public hearings, they notify the clerk's office by a certain date. So similarly, we have May 1st of each year, the clerk will send out notice to the community councils. If they have any issues, they need to notify the clerk's office by a certain date so we can notify the assembly that there's been a request for a public hearing on a certain license. And then it'll follow through down the rest of the way with, if they don't send in their application by a certain date, we send notice of the expiration, and then got rid of the fee. And then at the bottom, that's striking that extra, the addition that Erica proposed about the full hearing process and posting process. On 5 still.
So if you have a question here on G, whether it would require a new special land use permit fee, did you get the answer to that? My understanding is no, because the special land use goes with the land. And so we're talking about applications for a new license.
So that's something I wanted to clarify is if it expires, if the license expires, doesn't the special land use permit expire with the license?
So the special land use goes with land.
I thought we did it separately with marijuana. That's how it is with the liquor licenses, but I thought we did it separately with marijuana.
I don't know, Lisa. What do you?
I'd have to check. There might be some technical wording in there that I'm missing.
Yeah, so that's something I still have a question about.
I think slups go with the land.
Yeah, I thought we were only renewing the license.
Yeah, these are.
Right, you're only renewing the license, but my understanding was if it expires, everything is gone and you have to start the whole process over again.
Is that in our regulations?
I think it's in the land use AO. But that's something I need to
We can
get
go
an
back.
answer to.
We can go back.
So that I left that in as a question of maybe leaving that fee in because that might be the fee to do the special land use, but I don't know.
But this comes for us to decide 2 things. So
Yeah, well, we could, for some reason, I think that the special land use permit goes with the land.
it was my understanding, but we're not sure, so when will we find out? What if we don't?
I can get you an answer.
Okay, so if the answer
Mark, your point, you're right. Because it refers to 2103-105C10, expiration of special land use permit for marijuana shall expire at the time of expiration of either the state or municipal license. Yeah, you're right.
That's true, they got to start the whole process over again.
If you let it expire, yeah, right.
So,
So then the
override the
applicable fees
process.
are
The
still
same, yeah, the same required fee.
Yeah, so you'd have to pay for an entirely new special land use permit.
If you let it expire, right.
Right,
Most
which,
people
I
not
mean,
want it to
with,
expire.
I would not, right, I mean, I would not expect, after everything that they've gone.
This is the
through-
first time we're having the actual discussion about what happens if it expires.
Yeah.
Okay, moving along.
Yeah.
So August 31st would be the
August
deadline.
31st at
Okay.
midnight, if we have not received anything, they're expired.
And
It
the
has to
land
be
use
the
permit's expired.
deed, Correct.
It says in there that the land use permit also expires.
Yeah,
What's the
section,
code?
2103-105C, section 10, expiration.
Okay, so
Who's the owner to make sure they pay the fees?
Mhm. Okay, so section C is reserved, just waiting for the state.
Yep. So I'm following along with those regs to see if they pass.
Oh, they passed.
They all did?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll add that, we'll add all of those in, so all the blue, I'll incorporate. E you already saw. So on page 7, this is something that, legal, we discussed previously, and there was an email chain about, with.
Sorry, back up a moment. Sorry, back to 6. So this blue, so C becomes what?
Whatever the state just passed.
Yeah, so there's a new C that is under the state's corresponding 040 for ownership change. And so, being that we've mimicked a lot of theirs, we're incorporating theirs into ours.
Do we refer to theirs or do we take their wording?
We, for most of it, we've taken their wording and we've changed state to municipal.
So you will have on Tuesday amendments. You'll say, okay, we'll have this in front of us, then we'll have amendment to this C.
Well, so this isn't set yet, we haven't introduced it, so I'll just incorporate all of it and we'll have everything you guys want as the AO that's introduced. So
this
you
is
won't have
introduced
to.
on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Well, I thought we were, okay, oh, okay. So we
Yeah,
have
so we
time.
can incorporate all of it in and we won't have to do any amendments.
Okay, got it. Okay, sorry. Page 7.
And so then on page 7 at the top, this is one that I'm also waiting for legal to get back on, and this was the conversation of the deceased, either spouse or parent, and then some clarification of the difference between A and B was something else we were gonna ask about, because they have very similar language, and so.
I have one thing on this particular section. We want to make sure that this isn't an exhaustive list and it doesn't exclude trusts. So, for example, you're talking about, transferring to, partnerships, including, but it doesn't say, so I think it's fine. I don't think it does exclude trust, but we want to make sure we're not unintentionally doing that, because I would assume a lot of people will have their assets in something like that.
Yeah, I think unless it's specifically written in there that it's
Yeah,
excluded, I think it's okay.
just make sure you bring that up to them, because I'm not a lawyer, so.
Yeah, okay.
And I have heard Janice say some firms create a trust, so we just want to make sure. Because, and especially because I read it, like, when you start looking at it, it says, establish license issued to a partnership, including a limited partnership, a little limited liability company, or a corporation. I mean, it's like a list. This is what it is. It's not written saying a trust is included. And so I think that, just legally, the way I'm looking at it, I think it may unintentionally exclude it.
Yeah.
I'm just a little concerned,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Okay.
Okay.
And just so, A and B look to be redundant. So one or the other make it.
Mhm.
And then you saw the changes below. I changed written to electronic again for consistency. And then I did a little bit of rewording on
if there's a public hearing. Basically, we're assuming through our assembly process that most of these are going to be like alcohol on the consent agenda. But if somebody pulls one, yeah, if somebody pulls one, then it sets it for a public hearing. That's the if line. If a public hearing is required, and that's only if we're going to bifurcate and pull one. Or if the clerk just says what for a public hearing. So it just gives the assembly through our processes flexibility.
And then previous to numbering, there was a 7 that was relocation of a licensed premises not allowed, and legal had recommended just take that out. It was something that Erica was talking about, swapping if they have their cultivation on one end of the building and their retail on the other, and they want to swap them. So they said that's kind of no easy fix right now, we'll deal with it later, so they suggested just take it out. So that's the renumbering.
Okay.
And then in the public hearing, we have.
Okay, let's
changing it
back
to
up.
the-
Hold on, so is this public participation?
Oh, yes.
Okay, we also talked about this last sentence where it says in person may also give oral testimony. So if the public hearing is required, the person may also give oral testimony.
Right.
In accordance with section 3. Just reword that, you may not, this, the way it's written
Yeah.
now says, implies there will be a public hearing.
Yeah,
I don't,
so you're-
I don't think it implies there will be, because of the first part that she's adding.
What's it?
If a public hearing is required, which clearly indicates that, a person may also give.
What would you should already get changed?
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at what we did yesterday.
Yeah. Sorry.
We had talked about this change, that's good.
Did I give you the new one?
You did, but I just figured I had
Oh,
notes
okay,
on
okay,
this one,
okay.
so.
That's okay.
Yes, we did the change there of if, so that's granting, if the assembly decides that they want to do a public hearing on that one. So then line 34, just updated it to electronic mail, just kind of clarifying how noticing will be done. And then, so similar to alcohol licenses, and tying this back with sending notice to the community councils, I reworded it so that the hearing would be sent to each community council in the area of the proposed premises. I'm kind of recommending that we go back to the original language because some of these will be on borders of community councils. And so how we've done it with liquor licenses is I look at a map of the location of the establishment and the border lines of the community councils, and if they're close to the borders, I send notice to all of them that they're close to. So this encompasses that, and it doesn't limit it to just the community council that they're located in. And I took out the posting notice and the mailing notice section.
Okay.
So in this one, the big bold will actually be restored.
All right. And then on B, this was language that you had seen before, it was accepted. On page 9, line 10, I reworded it a little bit simply because in order to get their licenses or special land use certificate, they'll have to already have done the inspections and all of that, so I figured it was just easier to say they must have physically received the municipal marijuana license and special land use permit certificate, or we discussed saying it must be posted. So that's kind of up to how you guys want it worded.
When I say it instead of they, a lot of these are entities.
Or if the establishment, or something like that. After someone approves the license,
Until the establishment.
the applicant may not begin operating the marijuana establishment until the applicant has
Yeah.
physically received.
Okay.
Yeah, the applicant, that'll hit all of them, and it's consistent with your language.
And then the next few, you've already seen. Yeah. And then again, blue, I'll incorporate all of that in now that the state has passed their regs. On second fee. So the other pages I gave you are the 1075-010 are fees for fire inspections. And then 2120-001 are fees for the land use inspections, the land use enforcement. So I just incorporated that in there. The Department of Health, I haven't heard back from yet for the citing of their code, but they have wording in their code that says on the third inspection that has consistent issues, they charge $300. So if they've gone and inspected 3 times and they've said 3 times the same thing has to be fixed, then they'll charge for it. So I'm waiting to hear back about where that is, and then I can incorporate that. Or alternatively, we don't have to have the fees listed in here at all because they already have them. I kind of figured keeping it in and doing the reference would make it easier for people that are only looking at the
One of
marijuana.
the problems we have when we write code though, especially if you put the fee in there in this particular side of the code, when their fee changes, then we have to come back and change the code too.
Right. So this just lists the code citing instead.
Right, instead of the fee. So I think that's a better way to do it because then we don't have to track down and update all these codes that we've done this before where we've referenced something and then the fees change. So I think codes are
So if you want to look at them, fire departments are pretty explanatory. They have a long list. And this is actually in the licensing code too. So this is Title 10 of what they do for all license inspections. And then Title 21 is on page 3, and it's G1 and 3 that Jack Frost pointed out as their inspections. The other ones we've already seen. We will incorporate page 11. You've already seen. Page 12, we've already seen. Page 13 for the security alarm systems and lock standards on lines 16 and 17. This is one that Erica had emailed Cleo Hill for about lock standards. Her reply was more about the public safety of the exit. So she had said they're more interested in seeing door locks that the lock or deadbolt is integrated with the door handle so that it's one motion of being able to get out. So I recommend that we leave in the commercial grade non-residential door locks because that takes care of the lock standards and then kind of gives a little bit more guidance of what fire is looking at in those locks.
I have a little question on this because I understand what she's saying. In one motion, you should be able to get out. But in commercial buildings, they don't have deadbolts.
No, we do. I mean, a lot of them.
So to me, as I'm looking at this looks like they're never going to be. I mean, because I'm thinking about my house, right? I have a deadbolt that is not integrated with the door handle.
And a lot of our security systems are already.
I think it's less secure when you have everything integrated with just a handle.
I mean, she's not talking just about fire exits. Huh? She's talking about.
It might be the fire exits, and I might need
Because
verification from her.
I don't think this works.
It probably wouldn't be on all.
It doesn't work with how the things are set up.
I just took her email and kind of put it in, but yeah, we can.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
People should be allowed to have a deadbolt.
Yeah.
Now, on the fire exits, that's different, because you can go to any of these doors where there's fire exit, and you just push the bar, and it opens, right?
Yeah.
That might be right.
That's probably what she's talking about, but we don't want to inadvertently tell somebody, like, that their
All
ex
of their-
door, can't have a deadbolt.
It shouldn't be all of their entry next year.
But maybe it's on fire, whatever, it's
Yeah.
doors.
What I
That
would
would
assume
make
she
sense.
means, but it was definitely not.
Think about your business.
No, we know it's stress. I see it like at their front door. I mean, most of them have that, and that's very secure. I've watched people trying to climb open the push bar, and without a deadbolt. But my front door doesn't have a push bar because we're open, it's open, and it has a deadbolt. So all the main entrances are that way. And this
So
is
it's
because
probably-
she
she's probably
was dealing
just
with how the heck do you get out? And we're
Right.
how to keep you from getting in.
Right.
And I do on one door, and only when we're closed, but actually, this after we got broken into. This is on the interior door, we have like the bar, we cover the assholes used to do bar and everything.
Yeah.
Thing, and then we just take it down when we open. And that is very secure.
Nothing's gonna go.
So, you see the
Yeah.
potential.
So she's probably just meaning it for the emergency exits.
Which is important, but you know, if you have an emergency exit to the outside, it's really hard to get into those, and you don't have that deadbolt.
Right. I just don't want to make it where people have, they have their emergency exercise, but then and additionally, they have their regular,
Right.
maybe employee coming and going, but they have a regular lock and a deadbolt. They should be able to have that.
In those issues, the fire department's gonna look.
Yeah, I mean, the fire department, they go in there, they inspect with us, the whole team, whole squad of
So this
guys.
this probably isn't even necessary. We could just leave it as the commercial.
Because they're going to have fire standards and the building standards.
Yeah, and that's totally her code, her fire
Yeah.
code.
And so I think maybe what Erica was wanting to do is clarify, maybe have a better definition than commercial grade, non-residential, because she was trying to find out the ANSI grades and
Well,
said they
one of
don't.
the easy things is, whatever the fire department goes to now, because they have lots of businesses they inspect, before they open to the public. So, it might already be referenced in the building code or fire
Oh,
code or
sure.
something. But, we shouldn't deviate and make up our own language.
Yeah. So I think it would still work under the security standards, leaving the language as is. Because I haven't heard anything about the ANSI grade 1, and I don't know if
So,
the
and
industry
we-
is that standard.
Honestly, no, well, here's the security companies do it, and they put it in, and a lot of them are slide keys, and this is, one of the other things we talk about later, I'm gonna start doing, asking the MCB not to post our security diagrams and the cameras and where they're pointing and stuff. I wouldn't suggest getting into telling people exactly what grade of lock to do, because then people can figure out how to undo those ones. Yeah.
So if we left it as the commercial grade, non-residential.
Yeah, just keep it generic, just so.
Okay.
I think on there so that you don't have this thin residential hollow door with a little brass.
Right.
1.5-inch screws.
I have this
Just not
feeling
right.
after all the money, nobody's
Yeah.
gonna have the Walmart version.
We could have some real budget
You could.
Not in
In
Anchorage.
old buildings.
No, you're a client.
Well, not in Anchorage. We've got some guys out in like Fairbanks that are out in the middle of nowhere, and it's not, as sophisticated at all. But here, you just,
Population,
Yeah,
what it is,
yeah.
you're more likely to do everything.
Okay, so we'll retrench on the agreements.
Yeah, so I think that's probably best to leave as is then. And then on page 14, this was addressing your concerns with me. I did some reworking of the language, and I added on the assembly may refuse to issue or refuse to renew a license or otherwise limit or restrict a license granted under this section. And I copied our language from other licenses, so that's kind of consistent with, that gives you guys the ability to do all of the above.
Let me just look at this for a second. Because it says, the assembly may refuse to issue or refuse to renew a license or otherwise restrict a license granted under this section. So it doesn't clearly say out there, amend, change conditions, but that's what you mean by restrict.
Well, otherwise limit or restrict, yeah.
That's what you mean by restrict. The assembly may refer hearings to the administrative hearing officer, but we can also have our own hearings.
You could be, yeah.
But
So
it
you
doesn't
may
say that.
refer it, well, if you're refusing to renew or issue, you're the first line. You have the ability to do the hearing yourself, or you can refer it to the hearing officer. So it'll always be appealed to the assembly first.
But you're right, and I think, as I'm saying the word may instead of shall, so it says that, but I still don't think it's clear.
Okay.
But what am I talking about? You have a note here that legal is still working on this.
Yeah.
We had a robust discussion about that when we had our meeting with legal and everybody.
Yeah.
Manny, did you check with Dean Gates on that? Because legal may take a while, but Dean Gates works correctly.
He was in that meeting, And we talked about this robustly.
He got this email, yes, so he.
So again, it should say, again, it should be very, very, very clear that the assembly can refuse to renew, we can revoke, we can modify. I mean, we have other places in the language where we use the same words. We can modify, amend, revoke, suspend. We can do all of the above.
Right.
So is there-
We wanted to make
is
sure we
there-
had that ability.
Is there a problem for adding the word modified?
I can change that. I just copied language that we have in our other licensing sections with the limit or restrict.
Yeah. Because you might want to add a condition, and that would be a modification.
And we might want to take a condition away. And we might want to be less lenient. If something comes in and says, listen, this is just not working, we might say, you know what, that makes sense, let's take it away.
So we're adding the word modify after restrict, restrict or modify, is that what we're?
Otherwise, limit, modify, or restrict a license.
And I just want to make it clear that the assembly can hear it, or the assembly can. I think it says it in here, but it doesn't say specific.
So these conditions though, so gosh,
They don't have constituents, we do.
are these conditions on here, and I get so confused by this, but are these the conditions for the license and the special land use permit, Andy? So,
This is all license, so.
okay, all the conditions are the license,
Yeah,
okay,
this is
not
a
the.
license. So this is separate. This one is the licensing AO, and so it's
Mhm.
separate from the land use AO. And
So is
the
it
one
gonna,
that you
is it
see-
gonna mirror the
So all
conditions
of that portion is the land use conditions on the front page of those packets.
Mhm.
You'll see the section 1, and that's the licensing. So that 1 and 2.
So
those
you
are-
guys, so where can you modify the land use permit then? You see what I'm saying? So if
Well,
you.
so it's not in these ARs, it's in the main AO. So these ARs are specific to the licensees and their establishments. This AO is the over-encompassing license regs for all of them.
So I guess what I'm asking is like these conditions, these 9 conditions are on the land use permit. What happens if you guys wanted to modify the conditions on the land use permit? Where do you have that?
It's not in the licensing section.
It would be in the land use.
So do you have that already? Do we have that already?
We can do,
Yeah.
one thing that would be helpful for us is if you could put us together, a packet that has the land use permit rules, the actual law that we passed, the AO as amended, whatever changes have come. If you can get us together the actual municipal code on land use and on licensing, so when we were going through this, we could flip right to the land use. Because we were militant in making sure the assembly could change things. If somebody.
We're militant, we're consistent.
We were, we were. But I think we're confusing land use, and licensing.
Yeah.
So,
So this is specific only to the license portion of these.
I mean, hopefully we'll have no problem in a perfect world. Who knows?
but it would be helpful to have a little
It would be.
binder then to. Yeah.
Yeah, so then, let's see, page 15 is stuff that you've seen before. I did add, and I was gonna check with legal to make sure that it was copacetic, but there's already procedures for the clerk for license suspension or revocation in 1010. So I tied it back to that as well, because 1080 is slightly different. So I don't know if that's something that we want or not. But it's a similar, it's a similar process of what it is for all the licensing, where there's the decision to either repeal or suspend based off of, so 1080 is if there's any crimes done in the meantime, they have to give the disclosure that they haven't had any issues because we can't get the fingerprints.
Okay, so
So-
let me back up for a minute. I don't think I followed. So municipal code 1080-821, and that is specifically for what the procedure for suspension or revocation by the clerk's office, specifically by the clerk's
Yep,
office.
specifically by the clerk's office under the marijuana title or chapter. And then 1010 is the general licensing for the clerk's office directions for that.
Okay, so you'll just double check with legal to see if they want that reference there.
Yeah.
so incredibly obvious, like the dumbest person can understand it. I hate to say it that way, but you know what I mean? I mean, it has to be so, because we will get somebody in here who says, oh, no, it doesn't say that the assembly can modify, or the assembly can't, so it has to be like Arctic Herbery straight. Let me just put it out there.
I've never heard of that before.
No gray. You must have no gray in this section. Jen is laughing. You don't even say anything. You know. You just know.
I'm just observing. The sex trafficking poster that we have to put up now. Well, I know, I agree. But where are we? Where's it at? Is it on the licensing side or the land use side?
I think right in the front door should come in.
I think it's in the employees area, but I mean, where do we?
That's under something other than the marijuana stuff.
So that's just
separate.
basic licensing.
That's for all, that's not just marijuana establishments. There's other
It's bars.
business types that have to do.
Oh, right. It's
It's
all.
like employee bulletin board.
Yeah, it's on the employee bulletin board. I guess, okay, so the issue is I was trying to, and maybe this is something you can help me with, I was trying to figure out, to give them to my clients, it has to be 12-point font with all the different languages, and that doesn't, and then it's supposed to just be this size, but that doesn't fit on this size. So,
I voted against that, just so you know.
I know,
I
and
have to get you in contact with somebody else because I do not know. about
okay, because I
that.
tried to ask friends, I asked Erica a little bit yesterday, but I didn't want to like.
Yeah, I think that was the Department of Health's, so I would like to contact.
Okay, so I'll show you.
Yeah.
It falls on them because they said they would provide the sign and it goes one online, so if it doesn't fit, it's up to them to change their wording.
Oh,
But
okay.
that's a separate issue.
I will.
Those would be 21 languages now.
It's supposed to be up, April 1st, it's supposed to start, and then,
Department
Put in
Health.
Clinton
Department Health.
next.
Yeah, check with Shelley.
Yeah, for that.
Okay, so, gone through this, I have a couple comments. One is we talked about, a kind of a transition period. So this says only emails, only on ones, the community councils are flagged, a public hearing. But we have promised people, you will have another chance to come back to it. So we have.
Well, then notice when we have the agenda out there.
Yeah,
Some of the
and,
people aren't looking at that.
well, I still think, I mean, you're still gonna send out your notices with all the community councils. You're gonna be like, here's your list and your community council. And I still think it's a procedural thing through the post office to schedule. I still think it's a good idea to say, you take groups 10 or 20 or whatever you want to group them as, and put them the first year, at least, because we told everybody. You just put them, schedule them all for public hearing. And I think it'll be a lot like what we do anyways. Anybody here, nobody's here, okay, moving on. That's what I think.
And we can definitely do it differently. I was thinking for codifying purposes, we don't want to.
Exactly.
We don't want to do that. We want to do it more of the general and the looking towards the future. As that's going to be the standard of what we'll do. But
100% agree with
and
you.
Barbara was saying she can also look into if there was anybody that spoke on any of these. We can see about getting back in contact with them and seeing if they would like to come and speak on the renewals. So there's a couple of options of stuff that we can do to reach out to people also.
Well, that's just our internal processes,
Yeah.
not code.
Right.
I mean, if we could do a search on Arctic
Anything we
Herbery and see who testified against that, that's mainly the only one that problem.
Just this year. And then just put them on the consent agenda. And they'll know, because when they send out their notices to all the community councils, if they're having somebody who's sparking more interest, they can just separately send that one by itself.
Amanda, I attend the Federation of Community Council meeting every month, so I'll tell these people this is what's coming up.
Yeah.
So get ready for it.
I'd also watch it, if some of these even within the same sentence, assembly is capitalized or not capitalized. Should make a choice.
That's right. I always capitalize it.
I always capitalize it.
Just, have someone make a choice, if it's we're in
Yeah.
the same sentence, and then lawyers will find some way to make that significant.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's similarly with municipality. I've seen it capitalized or not, and check for that too.
I didn't see anywhere in here, and maybe I just missed it, where it defines, what status a license is in to need to renew. So the state, so I just don't want you to get sideways with like, you get all these renewals and you don't charge a fee because you think you're gonna get a chunk from the state, but you're only gonna get a chunk from the state if they're active.
So
I didn't see it, but I
this
could have just
isn't
missed
the
it.
full AO, and I'll check. I think it's
I just want to make sure it's clear in the AO
We should
who
charge the
has to
lawyers.
renew, so that we know
As
to.
a-
That's
Well,
to
for
renew.
our code, it's all licenses, so we don't specify.
Okay, so that's what I was wondering. Okay, so no matter what, even if you're not active,
Yeah, if
you're
you
renewing.
hold a
Okay.
license, if you hold a license in your hand, if you hold a municipal license in your hand, you will have to renew.
Would you have to be active to
Exactly.
hold that? Okay, so that's fine.
Yeah.
Okay, so are we done with licensing?
I think so. I was just gonna ask Mandy, when, you have a couple of legal questions that we're waiting on those answers. When do you think you might have those by?
We have another meeting next week. though.
Yeah.
But we have a
Yeah.
handful of
And
marijuana.
they do know that we're trying to get this done for the addendum, so.
But we're only introducing it to you, okay? So
Right.
if
We
there's
could
a-
amend that.
We could
Right.
email them if there were additional, we could, why don't you put it on the agenda for the next meeting, it might be really fast.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Okay, so,
We can do it as a tentative, so that way we don't need to.
Ryan, you want to hit us with your chart?
Oh, sure. I did want to ask how much more time, like a lot, Francis did want to go over some change stuff.
Our meeting in half an hour goes on good.
Right.
I have another meeting at 11:30.
We have some.
Okay, I can do this real quick, and then I can discuss with Francis at the next meeting if you want to schedule changes.
Well, that's fine. How many applications do we have?
For the next week, we have 4. There's 4 for the next 2 meetings.
So that would be there.
Just towards the end of the agenda, if I can ask.
Okay, so this marijuana permit flow chart was developed between myself and Land Use Code Enforcement Officer Elaine Quigley. And we've been having meetings between planning staff, land use enforcement, and development services, zoning review staff, to make sure that we have all the applicable steps in here without getting too wordy and without confusing people. So here it starts with a free pre-app. So we're going to be recommending that all applicants, even prior to applying to the state, that they have a pre-app if they have any property in mind. I know that's a difficult thing to find a property, and often as real estate moves very fast, so you need to make a decision quickly. But if they do have a property in mind, they can come in. We can tell them all upfront all the requirements that are going to be imposed. You know, any parking issues, paving issues, landscaping issues. And then encroachments, the non-conforming termination is necessary. We can cover all that prior to them even applying to the state. And then in accordance with that, they have to do their community meeting prior to submitting their special land use permit. And then it breaks it down into everything that they need to do with building services, and everything that they need to do with planning. And it kind of color codes everything, and it gives them all the sort of landmark steps to go through. And that way, when an applicant comes in, this is an entire roadmap for them. And if they're in process and they're saying, I just don't know what the heck's going on, where am I? We can kind of point to them and say, well, you're here, and this is the next step, and this is what you need to do to get to that next step.
I'll tell you one thing, if you, this is an issue with every building, but comment, correction, approval, receive permit, inspections, there's a feedback loop. So like you get inspections, then it goes back to,
There is, correct, that's a good point.
because now this, oh, I do this and I'm done. No, it actually, you have an inspection, they go, oh, you didn't miss something, go back to plan review. In all honesty.
90 say to get 3 inspections, they charge you.
It all gets expensive, you quit looking at some point. Yeah.
So the zoning review happens after you, I mean, we've been doing zoning review comments before we schedule an inspection for the city. You have that after? Yeah, I'm right there. I mean, so you've got zoning review down there after you schedule your city inspection.
That would be comments after the final inspection. So if there's any corrections that are needed, that they find during the inspection.
So the plan review is really zoning will be in this plan review box too?
It may be a little confusing and pressing work in the wording, but the code enforcement officer is essentially checking if there's something on property to make sure that everything's compliant. But that is a good point. So maybe a word.
you go through, yeah, you got traffic, I mean, it's the same everybody.
It's quite the process.
Yeah, and Erica did one that's kind of a little bit simpler, that's been posted on the municipal marijuana webpage too, but I think this one is really good. And I would say, since you guys have done this, I would try and get flyers on there too, because that's the one that I've been getting the most feedback on of confusion, of that there's multiple fire inspections. And so I think that would be helpful to have on there also, so they know what to expect.
Because looking at it, they might say, okay, building safety planning department, if DHS is as a symbol in here, but if fire's not mentioned on there, that is a good catch.
Fire is mentioned,
I don't see it, I don't have the last one either.
it's on,
Oh, there it is, under plan review. It is.
Oh, and fire.
Yeah, it's there.
zoning, I just zoning's a big one, I mean, because that's
Yeah, fire's there.
Michael. This is mentioned a lot.
Plan review.
Yeah, yeah, it's in the design review.
Yes, the inspections are just,
Oh,
We won't scare them off, right? It's not like federal program review there. Not nearly as bad.
I guess,
Pretty busy page, it's quite a process here.
so you say begin operations and then they get final CEO, so somewhere in there we get a CCO, right?
correct, so the CCO is the last gray box on the left.
Oh, there we go, I got it.
So then that, begin operations, they get their CCO, they can begin operations if they have some inspections. And then, say they were to begin operations now, well, they can't do paving, they can solve their paving. And this allows them to close out, I think, typically give them 6 months or something, depending on when that CCO is issued. They give them a set amount of time to resolve those issues.
Like landscaping, right? It's January, you can't put in your grass. We've had this discussion.
And
You know what I
dealt with
really
that,
like,
didn't we?
what I really like about this, are you sending this out to people now?
We do have it up in the front counter.
Because what's so great about it is, you color coded it, but then there's a phone number. They don't have to go digging
Yeah.
through the municipal website. That's brilliant.
Oh, yeah.
I would add, maybe like if you have that little red rectangle, retail facilities require DHS permit, a cultivation facilities require the electric, 2BI4, and then just have that letter.
We could, I
You don't want
mean, it's such a standard thing.
You can
with
just
them,
keep
but-
going.
Yeah, you
It
could
is,
so,
uh,
you could really
true.
keep on rolling with it.
This is a great starting point. I do like how it has all the
Yeah,
contact
that's
numbers.
too. Yeah, there's so many things to do.
Yeah, if somebody came in off the street, this would come in handy, just saving time, definitely.
Do we need to add your phone numbers down there too, before you're written down there?
No, but I think there's some legal implications of that. Put policy on there. That's a good way.
But yeah, I think the DHHS permits, it's because DHHS has the requirement for the 3 basin sink, and so there's a couple other things that are specific to DHHS that are not not in Title 21, so it could be mixed. So
We were
that's why
looking at this earlier, no marijuana in public. What's happening to vaping?
Yeah.
Is marijuana used in public?
Or edibles or anything. I mean, some things just have no phone number.
It may be obvious because I'm picking this up here, but if it's posted somewhere, I would put municipality agreement here. We, just a bizarre thing really, is there's a couple who bought a house in Ocean Point, which started cultivation. Literally, they posted it, still going, and they said the state allows it, they're good to go, and I said, this looking really, please call. I don't know if they ever called, they said call tomorrow. But they were just confused. They thought state was good. We got approved. Cynthia said we're gold. And I said that's state. And I don't think Cynthia thought that far.
They
But
seem
people
very
can-
unsophisticated then.
They're very, but the people, there will be. If you want to nip them in the bud, they spend a lot of money. Well, some thousands preparing this.
That's a
So
lot
it
of money.
simply can't ever happen, very clearly if they just call the city.
Yeah, and I think
But this doesn't
honestly,
say you have a state process. Someone may look at this and start this and think they're good.
Yeah, I think they got a different process in that city.
We had a really hard time getting the state to
Pete, I know,
need
you're
a liquor
different.
license.
Everybody's different.
Everybody's
If you
different.
don't have a special land use permit, you need a liquor license, you're not done yet. So we tried to work with the state a lot to make sure that they would refer people to